Hello and welcome to Oxford Analytica's weekly briefings. I'm Megha Kumar, Deputy Director of Analysis at Oxford Analytica, and I'm here today with our International Economy Region Head, Vanessa Rossi. Vanessa, thank you very much for joining us today. So the US Federal Reserve has finally ended the mystery. It's going to roll back its quantitative easing program by about $10 billion to 75 from January 2014. I want to begin with asking you about what this means for the US economy.
Well, firstly, we should remember that while this is sort of the end of QE, it's the beginning of tapering, this is an extremely gentle taper.
Yeah.
We're not moving anywhere quickly, bumpily. Those people over the last year who were worried about this process and thought that it could be difficult, turbulent, the Fed could get it wrong, I always suggested that, look, have a bit more faith in the Fed. These people know how to do it. And I think this is a final tribute to Bernanke, that he's been able to introduce this measure moving towards tapering as he's leaving, with a very, very gentle move towards tapering that's got it just about right. I mean, we can see from the way that markets have reacted that this is not at all caused the chaos that was much feared. And I think the signal clearly here is that the Fed knows just what it's doing. It knows how to go easily. There's no need to rush. If there's anything that's going wrong, this could even be reversed. And this means that the Fed itself can gain more information from this gentle tapering as to just how things are moving. In the new year, we'll see if everything stays on course, then he will obviously, there'll be further progress towards tapering back. Maybe by the end of 2014 this will be all done with, and we'll be looking ahead to other policies. So firstly, it's not very much. So the changes on the US economy side are going to be commensurately small. Nevertheless, I think there's a little bit of tightening in here that could nudge yields up again a little bit more at the long end. We've seen a lot of the move already over the 2013, already taking interest rates to near 3%, but probably during the course of 2014, if the economy is moving steady as it goes, we could see a little further nudge up, but a nudge. So I don't think there's anything here that looks extremely dangerous, but the Fed will be watching very carefully indeed in case it does upset financial markets, if it does upset the mortgage market and housing, if it does upset the growth in jobs process. They'll be very watchful and be careful about how they take the next steps. So I think we're okay as far as the US economy goes.
No, I mean, I think it's an important point that we needn't be alarmist about the onset of tapering. Let me invite you to say
we have to get back to normal, remember.
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be done sometime. So this is part of a process that everyone knows will have to take place.
Indeed.
So I think in this context of where it has to happen, this is about as good as it gets.
I'd like to invite you to say a little more about how this might affect emerging markets, considering that there has been a lot of concern, especially about the fragile five. How do you think this will play out in emerging markets then?
I think this is the more difficult problem. And it's clearly not absolutely a US problem internally, but nevertheless the US does understand that there can be impacts, and the Fed does too. So they'll be very lively to any kinds of issues that are raised here. Nevertheless, I think they want to put a marker down with this move to say that we have to do these things, so get ready. There's been a long time over the last year for everyone to be prepared for this. There should be no surprise in that sense. The warning signals have been there, and indeed even some of the reactions have come through. Nevertheless, in spite of preparing, in spite of the financial market changes having happened, with countries bolting down the hatches, looking at where their finances come from and taking care, I think we cannot be sure as to whether there are not some other problems that could come out of this, perhaps even in areas that have not been mentioned so far. And of course, because they are the unknown unknowns, then we don't necessarily know where this can take place. Certainly the big five have been in the frame. There are many questions over the whole process of the development in Africa, for example, that we discuss a lot of in more detail with your Africa team. And clearly part of the problem there is that this is a continent that's only just been gearing up to take part in financial markets and coming to fruition just at the time when this easy money has been taken away. So they have to somehow be given a lifeline to think this effort's been worthwhile, and that if they continue along this track, then in future years money will come flowing in, and that it will have been worth the effort to get benchmark yields in, to be able to get ratings from agencies, all those efforts to get bond markets moving ahead through a number of African countries. I think that's one of the most critical things to watch for, and I'm sure in Washington there's many people aware of that process. So fortunately we can be hopeful that this will still work. I think the other main jurisdictions, if we take India, as you know very well, and of course Brazil, Indonesia as well, Turkey, these are countries which have had more experience of turbulence already. They know a lot more about it. They have central bankers who are aware of this, and so in some ways they'll probably be finding it easier to manage the processes that lie ahead. And we shouldn't forget that many of the true problems that these countries face in moving ahead with development are not to do with QE and interest rates and global flows. They're very much to do with their own internal factors, which still need to be addressed, reforms addressed, in order for them to be able to complete the development process.
Indeed, indeed. And I think this is precisely the time when economies such as India and Indonesia need to look at their internal deficiencies that they've been able to ignore throughout this period, and now the spotlight is on those reforms. I think that's a very important point to make.
They've now come to the point where they will have to take those issues seriously. But it still does leave us with a clear view of how important the flow of funds is around the world. That there are countries which are very self-financing, as of course China has been, and there are countries which do need to have imported capital to be able to make that progress in infrastructure spending, for example, to be able to move on with development. I think we need to be able to fit these different patterns of developing countries into the overall framework of world capital flows. If we're going through a process of change for the US, and of course on the other side a process of still quite painful adjustments in Europe, then it's become a slightly more difficult period for these countries which need inflows of funds to readily obtain them. And so I think we've got a little bit of a struggle over the next couple of years while this plays out.
This leads me to my last question, really. How do you see this affecting global growth in 2014?
We already have a somewhat difficult background. This is not just to do with QE. QE will be a useful process to blame for things going wrong if there are further problems, but the reality is that there was already difficulty here in generating the next tranche of growth. We need new dynamics, and so far they're rather lacking. I already mentioned that Europe has a lot of its own problems, and certainly we don't look there for any strong new dynamics to push the rest of the world. The US actually is doing its job in partly leading growth, but a lot of this has become more internalized, of course, particularly because of the greater self-sufficiency of the US economy. China, unfortunately, in the sense for the world, has cooled off, and yet they've been asked to cool off for so many years and to pay more attention to internal growth. So they are fulfilling what they have to do at this stage. But with these three big jurisdictions of the world economy simultaneously not pulling as much weight through the rest of the world economy, then I'm afraid the other countries have to look more at their own internal processes. So I think we have a quite prolonged period of more internal introspection and reform, and that means inevitably we'll have a somewhat slower process of growth during the coming year than perhaps overall world institutions would like. They're clearly moving towards forecasts that are in that direction, but it's not a very easy process, and especially because of some of the difficulties it will impose probably on some of the poorest countries in the world.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you.
We're watching these issues very closely at Oxford Analytica. If you would like any further information about our products or services, please do visit our website. Thank you very much. See you next week.